Bonjour tout le monde.
Good morning, everyone. I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 153 of the standing.
Is taking place in a hybrid form. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. Before we begin, I'd like to ask all in-person participants to read the guidelines written on the updated cards on the tables. These measures are in place to help prevent audio and feedback incidents. A kind reminder to all those in person and online that for the safety of our interpreters, that it is very important that your microphones are muted when you are not speaking. Merci à tous pour votre coopération.
Thank you all for your cooperation.
Conformément à l'article 108.3G du règlement, le comité reprend.
Pursuant to Standing Order 108.3G, the committee is resuming its study of Report 6 of STDC of the 2024 Reports 5 to 7 of the Auditor General of Canada.
Sustainable Development Technology Canada, Zoe Colbuck, Vice President, Ecosystems. Ms. Colbuck, you'll have 5 minutes for an opening statement, if you'd like, and I'll turn things over to you, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the committee for the invitation to appear today and participate in your study of the Auditor General's Report 6 on Sustainable Development Technology Canada. My name is Zoe Colbuck. I am joining you today virtually from my home in Calgary, Alberta, on Treaty 7 territory, where I recognize the traditional territories and oral practices of the Blackfoot, the Siksika, the Piikani, and the Kainai, the Tsuut'ina, the Stoney Nakoda First Nations, and Métis Nation Region 3. I began my work with SDTC almost 8 years ago. It has been an honor to work with the many skilled and talented professionals at the Foundation, each of whom remains steadfastly committed to advancing sustainable economic growth in Canada. Through our work together, the Foundation has supported hundreds of clean technology businesses that are generating jobs and contributing to local economies across the country as they tackle global sustainability challenges. In my role as Vice President Ecosystems, I am responsible for a team of individuals who work in regions across Canada. These individuals are tasked with helping build awareness of SDTC funding to ensure broad representation of applicants from across Canada. This work includes outreach to provincial funding programs, including one-window partnerships in British Columbia, Alberta, and Quebec, potential partners, investors, as well as supporting a whole-of-government approach to help connect companies to the various supports that the federal government offers. I was also assigned responsibility to manage the application process for the seed funding stream, following the establishment of this new funding stream in 2019. This stream focused on early-stage funding for advancing clean technology innovation and was developed to foster and encourage collaboration through partnerships across Canada. Applicants were required to meet a series of eligibility requirements as outlined in the contribution agreement, were screened by a panel of experts, presented to SDTC's Project Review Committee, and then recommended to the board for approval. In launching this stream, an explicit target was to grow the number of women-led companies that SDTC was supporting. And prior to the funding pause last fall, over a third of the companies funded were led by women. This approach helped to expand SDTC support across Canada through a network of over 85 partners. It also resulted in SDTC supporting firms in every province in Canada for the first time in the history of the Foundation. I was also involved in the 2 pilot projects that were approved under the Ecosystems Pilot Funding Stream. Lastly, I want to respond to some past testimony at this committee regarding my conduct as a leader. I was surprised and deeply saddened by the allegations. I have always strived to foster an inclusive, supportive, and respectful workplace, and to conduct myself with the same values of integrity, empathy, and kindness that I look to instill in my 3 young daughters. These allegations were thoroughly reviewed by McCarthy Tétrault, and their final conclusions on these matters are on the public record. I want to close my remarks by wishing all of the talented and dedicated colleagues I work with at STTC the very best as they transition to the National Research Council. I will continue to support them and the new board in fulfilling their mandate to ensure the transition is as smooth as possible for my exceptional colleagues and the entrepreneurs and small business owners that STTC supports. I welcome your questions.
Much, Ms. Colebrook. We'll now begin our first round, which will consist of 4 members with 6 minutes each. Mr. Perkins, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, witness, for coming. You oversaw the seed fund, which the Auditor General found was essentially illegal outside of the contribution agreements. In other words, the fence posts that the government set up that allowed the spending of taxpayer dollars at STTC. Who created the seed fund? Whose idea was it?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. The seed fund was a funding stream that was established in 2019. And so the strategic direction for the foundation was set by the board, and then the funding stream was established under that direction.
Thank you. And then, so the board set it up, and the board members selected as the screening mechanism for a lot of those projects companies they either sat on the board and are chaired, like the Fischerin Center. Is that correct?
So, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, there was approximately 85 different partners that STTC worked with. And so those partners would nominate companies for funding. And then those nominations would go through an eligibility screening process. And so a nomination
I've read the documents. That wasn't my question. My question was that you had accelerators set up to review these things. Did you not, like the Fischerin Center?
No, it was staff that would review the projects for eligibility. And then had they met the eligibility criteria that was set up for the seed funding stream, the companies would then go forward to a panel of experts that would review them. Then the recommendations would be made to the project review committee. The project review committee would then recommend projects to the board of directors.
Okay. Who did you report to?
I reported to the former CEO, Leah Lawrence.
So you worked then in parallel with the current acting COO, whatever they're calling him, Zaid, the former or VP of Investments?
Sorry, is that a question?
Yeah. So you worked with parallel? Is that correct?
Oh, yes, yes.
So,
yes. Right. Ziad Rami was my peer, and he held the role of Vice President Investment.
Right. So there are a number of emails when the consideration was being put forward for $6.8 million for the Fischerin Center from the board. There are a number of emails from him to the team, which I think includes you, fast-tracking their application. In fact, on July 30th, 2021, the subject says, Fischerin Center request to fast-track proposal. So who would have told him to fast-track that proposal? So, oh gosh. So I guess your question is, who would have told him to fast-track? I would expect, I'm trying to remember because I know Ziad addressed this at the committee before. So there's about 6 steps in the application process. So a fast track would be that the information collected on the project was sufficient and they didn't need to gather additional information on the project. He makes the determination to fast track it. That would be the decision of the Vice President Investment, would agree to fast track it, but it doesn't necessarily mean the project moves faster through the approval process. It just means that there's sufficient information to proceed to the next step. Fair enough. So the Fischerin Center was turned down for obvious conflicts of interest. It's shocking to me that it ever made it anywhere, even through a consideration process. It was turned down, but the same Vice President
in a letter in January 2022 said that they would use staff at SDTC to find money elsewhere in the government. Do you think it's the right thing for, it was the right thing for the employees of SDTC to essentially be the business development arm, finding government money for a center which was set up by the chair of the board?
It's my understanding that the Verschuren Center asked SDTC to not support them in finding any additional funding streams after their project was denied.
Not what
SDTC
happened.
was never fun.
But that's not what happened. That's not what happened. According to the Vice President of Investments, yes, they did, in fact, help find them almost $11 million. Was that a regular occurrence where board member companies were being used or helped by staff to find other government funding for their projects?
So as I mentioned in my opening remarks, I worked with a team of ecosystem leads, and their mandate was to support
Well, yes or
companies
no.
in
It's a simple yes or
accessing-
no. I don't need a repeat of your opening remarks. Yes or no. Did board member companies that they had investments in regularly use the staff of SDTC to find other government money for their companies? Yes or no?
So what I was trying to answer is that the team at SDTC always put support for companies as the primary focus of the work that they did. If that meant a company was not a fit for SDTC's mandate, they would make recommendations based on their knowledge of the ecosystem of other places where companies could go to receive funding. So that was part of the work that the ecosystems team would do.
Thank you very much. That is your time, Mr. Perkins. Next is Ms. Yip. You have the floor for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ms. Kobach, for coming today. How many employees were you responsible for under your team?
That would change over time. So approximately, I'd say about 10 employees.
And
It might not be exactly right.
Okay, and why would that change?
Just if I took on additional responsibilities or if we recruited additional people to support the work that the foundation was doing. I was there for 8 years, so over time there was different structures.
Okay. How would you describe your leadership style during your time at SDTC?
One of the things is some of the feedback I'll get from my team is often I have a genuine caring of the people within my team. I would describe my leadership style as very empathetic, kind, supportive, as well as high performing. So I would always have high expectations for the team that I led, but would certainly want to ensure that they had support they needed to achieve the goals that they had in front of them. I'm very clear in my communication to them. I'm accessible should they need to speak with me. Those would be attributes of my leadership style that I always held in every leadership role I've been given.
So I take note of the qualities you've just mentioned, but it's also noted from many employees that there was significant staff turnover during the tenure of Leah Lawrence as president and CEO. Would you say that this is accurate?
So what I would say is in any organization, there is turnover, and the foundation did track those turnover rates, and they were within kind of the industry averages. I also believe that there was a review of retention rates within the McCarthy-Tétrault report. I seem to recall that I read that, and they were deemed to be within acceptable or normal ranges of turnover.
In your opening statement, you said you were surprised and saddened by the allegations from former staff or staff.
It was very sad to hear the allegations brought forward, because I've always strived to foster an inclusive and supportive workplace and to ensure that everyone's voices are heard and that people feel respected. So the allegations are very much not in line with the values that I have as a leader.
How would you compare your view of your leadership style with statements from multiple former employees saying that SDTC had a toxic culture and workplace environment during the tenure of Leah Lawrence as president and CEO?
I would say that those don't align with the vast majority of employees at the foundation today.
What about in the past?
I would not say that that was the experience, and I would just have to ask you to look at, there was a very thorough and comprehensive report of all of the allegations that were brought forward, and the conclusions of that report talk about, that was a view of a minority of people.
Well, these same former employees have alleged incidents of verbal abuse and public shouting. And how do you respond to these claims?
I do not shout. I do not shout at my children in my home. I do not shout at my employees at the workplace. The voice and the tone and the tenor that I'm using with you today is consistent with how I operate in a professional environment as well.
A former project manager at SDTC stated that nothing about working within or around this organization gives me the confidence that the individuals in management would admit to problems if they were found. Why would a former employee so publicly criticize the organization like this?
I'm not certain why a former employee made those statements, but what I can say is that employee, along with all employees, TTC and all former employees, were invited to fully participate in the review of HR practices that was commissioned by the Minister of Innovation and Science, supported by the Department of Justice. People were invited to speak freely in that review, and the conclusions on those matters are contained in those reports that are on the public record.
So, there are also claims that employees experienced a hostile work environment under your leadership. So were you aware of any concerns raised by staff about workplace culture?
I became aware, just give me a minute here, please, of the allegations against me when I began receiving anonymous emails, fraudulent emails that had been established in my name that contained many of the allegations that you were quoting today. That was how I was first informed of the allegations it made against me. It was very upsetting for me. I have never had anyone take my name and create anonymous email to be able to communicate broadly and publicly all of these allegations. Just take a minute.
Just maybe have a glass of water?
Yeah, I'll do that. I'm ready for the next question.
All right,
Okay,
Ms.
so-
Chip, I'm afraid that is your
Oh.
time, and I was going to ask the same thing of
Okay.
the witness. Madame Colebrook, take just a second, and I just want to double check that the next member will be asking questions in French. Just want to make sure you have the interpretation turned on.
I believe I have it correctly
Tell you what,
in place.
je vais demander question.
All right, I'll ask a question in French. Can you hear me in English now? Is it working properly? Yes. Okay, thank you.
We'll proceed to the next member, Ms. Colebrook. Are you ready to go?
I'm ready.
Good. Thank you very much. Madame Sinclair-Desgagnés, vous avez la parole pour 6 minutes.
Ms. Sinclair-Desgagnés, you have 6 minutes. Good morning, Ms. Colbert. Thank you for being with us today. You have a reputation among some former employees in terms of managing public funds, as well as a way in which you interacted with your employees that is not necessarily positive. So let's go directly to specific allegations, and I'd like to have true answers, please, because I don't have a lot of time. The Auditor General reported that at least 2 projects in her sample were not eligible for the Ecosystem Fund. One of them was the Saskatchewan Indian Institute of Technology one. So if we look closer at that project, there are a lot of things that don't work at all. So not only is this project ineligible. On top of that, the consultant who practically wrote the application, Mr. Chris Wormold, was then paid by SDTC, therefore with public funds, to approve the application that he himself wrote. So you are the director of this fund. You approved it, and you made sure that this this was funded. So what do you say about that, please?
So what I'll say is that there were 2 projects that were approved by the former board of directors, including the Saskatchewan Indian Institute of Technology. I was asked by the former CEO to conduct due diligence on an application that SDTC received.
Madame Colbach, ma question était très précise. Comment tolérer...
Ms. Colbeck, my question was specific. How do you tolerate that an external consultant wrote the application, and it even says it in them that Mr. Chris Arnold had helped them with the process, and that you then gave him the same mandate, $10,000 to assess his own application? It's a very specific question, and I'm not asking you to review the whole ecosystem fund. So how did you, as the director of the ecosystem fund, tolerate this kind of conflict of interest within your own team?
So I would have received the application from the Saskatchewan Indian Institute of Technology from the former CEO, and I was asked to conduct due diligence on that application with my team. The mandate of that project was to develop capacity amongst Indigenous entrepreneurs, as the foundation had not received any applications from companies led by Indigenous entrepreneurs. And the mandate of the project was to support.
Excusez-moi, Madame Colbach, vous ne répondez...
I'm sorry, Ms. Colbeck, you're not answering the question. You asked Chris Arnold to do this assessment, to do an external one, which is mandated by the contribution agreement, and it was even mentioned in the application. And so I'm not challenging the work of this Institute of Technology. I'm challenging your role. So I'm going to the next question because I'm not getting an answer on this. Next question. The project, the Verschuren project, you were part of the team that was mandated to follow up this stream, so there wasn't the possibility of having an online application. So you chose this project as a possible one. And when the employees raised their doubts about conflicts of interest, you said to them, and there were several people in the room, that you had done the necessary verifications with the board and the government, and that the conflicts were settled. However, when this project came up, well, then certain board members said, well, no, there's a clear conflict of interest. We cannot approve this project. So did you therefore lie to your employees, Ms. Colbeck?
I would always speak the truth to my employees. So for this project, there was a perceived conflict of interest with the former chair. That conflict would be adjudicated by the former board of directors, and it was, and the project never was approved for funding.
Donc, je répète ma question.
So I repeat my question. When the employees raised the potential conflicts of interest, you mentioned, and there were several people in the room who heard this, who testified to this, and who can say this, that you told them that you had done the necessary due diligence and that there was no conflict of interest. Everything was fine. So the board rejected the project because there was such a flagrant conflict of interest. It's normal that the board would have said, look, there's a problem here. So first of all, you presented this thing to the board as if there was no conflict of interest. But on top of that, you said to your employees who had raised doubts that there was no conflict of interest, that you had done the necessary verification. So how do you explain that? I need an answer. I've asked you several questions, so please answer it. You haven't answered several of mine. How could you justify saying to your employees that you had done this verification? Were you wrong? Did you dream that you had done this? Because it seems very contradictory with the testimony of several people who were in the room when you said that you had done the due diligence about the conflict of interest.
I'm going to answer your question to the best of my ability. I don't know what meeting you might be talking about, so it's hard for me to verify what someone claims that I have said. Can share is that if there was a potential conflict of interest with the board of directors, it would be adjudicated by the board of directors. If the board had made a decision to fund that project, I would have been responsible in my role.
Attendez, vous êtes en train de me dire que les exécutifs
So you're telling me that the executives of SDTC have no obligation to follow the guidelines on the conflict of interest, that it's up to the board to decide if that's the case? Because it's your responsibility. I'm telling you, you're paid with public funds. It's your responsibility to ensure that there is no conflict of interest in the projects that you are funding, that you are responsible for. You are a senior official. It's not up to the board to decide, it's you.
So the Auditor General has highlighted that there were gaps in the governance and oversight of the foundation in the management of conflict of interest. As the foundation, we've accepted all of those recommendations, have put them in place, and are following those procedures as well. And they certainly have strengthened the management of conflict of interest within the foundation.
Et voilà, merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
For 6 minutes, please. You have the floor.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Colbeck, for being with us today. I think I'll just start by trying to understand exactly what your role is. I'm an ecologist by training, and so ecosystem means probably something a bit different. And it's, I think, a relatively new term in the business community. And you touched on this in your opening remarks, but could you just tell me what, if you're a VP ecosystem, what does that mean?
Absolutely. So I also had those same questions when I was assigned this title, and really spent some time understanding the importance of ecosystems in the work that we do. So the way it works is if you think of a company or an entrepreneur that's trying to develop a new and innovative business idea that's never been developed before, or is trying to do something very challenging, you recognize there's an ecosystem of supporters that would surround that company. So that would mean different partners that they would work with. So that could be advisors, that could be investors, that could be different technical experts that they would have. It could be different funding opportunities across various governments. So really the role of Vice President Ecosystems was to lead a team that would have relationships with all the different players within the ecosystem surrounding a company, and would build relationships that could help to support those companies.
So I guess it's that same thing in a natural ecosystem. Everything's connected to everything else. And you said you worked with 85 partners, and what would are these sort of like accelerators that would be connected to all the companies as well?
Yeah, so they're, like entrepreneurial support organizations. So accelerators is one of the terms that do. So organizations that would be working with companies across the country.
So I guess the question that comes out of this in my mind is it just inherently problematic in the structure of that whole ecosystem to then have people within that ecosystem assessing grant applications, because they're all connected to everybody else, and there's going to be conflicts of interest all over the place. I'm just wondering, maybe this wasn't in your mandate, but why this was decided to be the structure of assessing these applications when. Well, let me just phrase it differently. Is the sort of sustainable tech ecosystem or the startup ecosystem, is that smaller than other, I'll just say, ecosystems in the business world? Is this kind of a place that would just generate conflicts of interest automatically? I'm just wondering why this was set up in this way in the first place.
Yeah, so I would say like an important point that I should say is that the accelerators were not assessing the applications. So the accelerators are almost like a referral partner, right? Like a nominator, and they would be providing supports to the companies in another way. So they weren't paid to assess any of the applications. And what I can say is, you know, those nominations, then the company, the application, the grant application actually went through an eligibility review. Then you'd have a panel of experts that would look at it to ask questions. And then it would be recommended to the project review committee. And then the board of directors ultimately would make the final decisions on any funding.
And so what was your background in this ecosystem? I know you worked for the Ralph Klein government back in the day on health issues or something, but what was your experience that gave you this position?
Yeah, so I have deep experience in kind of developing partnership relationships, external relations, and communications, and so as well as a understanding of business, having spent a decade in the private sector as well. So that would be the background and experience that I brought to this role.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I have for now.
Thank you, sir. Beginning our second round, which will be 6 minutes of various time. Mr. Cooper, you're going to lead us off for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Ms. Colbuck, I'm going to ask you some questions with respect to the application for funding by the Verschuren Center. When the decision was made not to move ahead with the funding application, the then VP of Investments and current COO, Mr. Rami, on January 18, 2022, wrote to the Verschuren Center and stated that SDTC would give best efforts to help the Verschuren Center secure funding from other government departments and agencies, notwithstanding the obvious conflict of interest that Annette Verschuren was chair of SDTC and at the same time was the founder of and sat on the board of directors of the Verschuren Center. It was her personal vanity project. So who was it, whose decision ultimately was it to direct staff to undertake efforts for the Verschuren Center to receive government funding from other departments and agencies?
So as I responded earlier, I did kind of look up that email that you had mentioned and subsequent emails. And, just to remind myself, it was a while ago and I was unfortunately experiencing an episode of long COVID, which had me not at work in part of that time period. But what I do recall is that the Verschuren Center had actually asked SDTC to not support them in finding funding after receiving news that their project with SDTC was not going to be moving forward.
Well, that's inconsistent with the testimony of Mr. Rami, who wrote the letter on January 18th, and when he was asked about it, he conceded, or based on his testimony, that efforts were made. Why wouldn't he have said that no efforts were made if, in fact, that were the case?
I mean, when you're at these committees, there's many, many questions coming at you. You're trying to remember quite an expanded period of time. We certainly, based on that email that you shared, the offer would have been made, but whether or not the offer was accepted, it's my recollection that it was not accepted for SDTC to provide support to that center.
And on what basis do you draw that recollection? Was there a letter? What communications were there between the Verschuren Center and with whom? What do you have to substantiate that? Because it's completely inconsistent with what we've heard.
Yeah, I can look and see what I can do to further substantiate that and follow up with the committee with that information.
Now, it also contradicts the testimony of the whistleblower who stated that unprecedented efforts were made to help secure funding for the Verschuren Center. So are you stating to this committee that the whistleblower misled or flat out lied to this committee? Is that your position?
My goal of this committee is to ensure that I provide fulsome responses to the questions I'm being asked based on my recollection of what happened at the time, because I know this matter is of utmost interest to this committee, and I want to ensure that I fulfill my duty and roles in responding to all of the questions that you were putting forward with the most fulsome answer that I can.
Thank you for that. And I want to go back to a question that Mr. Perkins posed to you, and that is, how often did SDTC staff assist board members, companies, or projects in which board members had interests in to secure funding from other government departments and agencies, as Mr. Rami offered to do on behalf of the Verscheren Center? How often did that happen?
So I was never contacted by any board member about a project that was being considered for funding. What I did provide in my response to your colleague was that SDTC did, and my employees and the staff at SDTC did work within that whole of government approach to providing support for clean technology companies. So we would make referrals to other funding agencies, other programs, provincial partners.
And those, sorry to interrupt, those referrals happened in certain instances where board members had conflicts. They were board members' companies. They had interest in those companies. SDTC staff, you're confirming, did assist projects where there were those types of conflicts. Is that correct?
So I'm based in Calgary, Alberta, right? So oftentimes there might be an applicant that was looking for funding, and the project that they had could have been a better fit for a program under Natural Resources Canada. So we would, make a referral.
I understand in general, but I'm asking just a very specific question, and I would like an answer, yes or no.
That is your time. Mr. Cooper, that is your time. We will come back to you, I am sure. Ms. Khalid, you are next, please. For 5 minutes, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to Ms. Kolbach for appearing here today. I'll start by asking, do you make any political donations to any political party currently?
No, I have not made any political donations.
Are you a member of any political party?
I am not currently a member of any political party.
Have you been in the past?
I have been a member of a political party in the past. I actually used to work, as was mentioned in this committee, I used to work as a political staffer under former Premier Ralph Klein, and was active in provincial politics for a number of years early in my career.
And which political party was that?
At the time, it was the Progressive Conservative Party of Canada. Of Alberta, not Canada. But I haven't been involved in federal conservative politics as well.
Okay. And in what capacity have you been involved in federal conservative politics?
Appel au règlement, Monsieur le Président.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
I have a point of order, and I've paused the clock. Oui, Madame Sinclair-Desgagnés.
Yes, Ms. Sinclair-Desgagnés. Well, I'd like to question the relevancy of this. I understand it's very partisan here at the committee, but it's supposed to be not partisan. So I think that we have enough information on SDTC that we could stick to relevant questions, please. As you know, I give a lot of latitude, an extraordinary amount of latitude to the members here. So Ms. Khalid may continue.
This remaining, please.
Thank you. Ms. Kolbach, I'd love an answer to that question.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
What has been your involvement with the Federal Conservative Party over these past number of years?
So I haven't been involved actively in federal conservative politics recently, but I do have, I have been on constituency association boards many years ago, supporting politicians such as I was a big supporter of the late Honorable Jim Prentice. He is an honorable man who I'm very proud to have known.
Thank you very much for sharing that. Now, in your testimony, you had talked about eligibility requirements being reviewed by staff. Now, who overlooked that staff, and what were the criteria and the management policies around it?
Yeah, so there would have been a director of either, a director that would oversee the staff that were ensuring that the seed funding companies met the eligibility criteria that we had in place. So that eligibility criteria would be, and I'm sorry, I don't have a list of kind of all of the eligibility criteria, but I can speak to them at a high level. So determining that the project had the potential to deliver an environmental benefit, which is a very important part of our mandate.
I'll stop you there and would request if you can perhaps submit that list to us in writing. We'd really appreciate that. Now, with respect to any of that eligibility criteria, were any ministers involved in that decision making?
No, there was no ministerial involvement in the decision making.
And so, with respect to specifically these applications, what safeguards were in place at SDTC to prevent conflicts of interest during your leadership specifically?
So every month, a full list of all companies that SDTC was funded was sent out to all staff members. Staff members were required to review that list and to declare any potential perceived or real conflicts of interest that they had, and then those conflicts would then be managed appropriately.
So, according to the RGCT report, deliberations and conclusions about conflicts were not documented prior to 2023. Now, why was that? And have you ever worked for an organization that didn't actually have that kind of documented process?
So I would say the Auditor General and our CGT highlighted some gaps within the conflict of interest policies that SDTC had. And there was a number of recommendations that were put forward. All of those recommendations have been accepted and have been put in place.
And who made the decision not to document these deliberations?
So the ultimate responsibility for the management of conflict of interest was under the former CEO of Sustainable Development Technology Canada.
And that is Leah Lawrence?
That would have been the CEO prior to 2023.
Thank you. And who do you think should be responsible to make sure that these are properly documented? And, clearly it wasn't a priority for you or your CEO at the time, but do you think that it should be a priority? And what would you suggest as a mechanism to make sure that we're taking our taxpayer dollars very, very seriously in terms of how they're being allocated?
Yeah, so one of the ways that SDTC has strengthened its conflict of interest practices is the hiring of an independent ethics advisor. And so that independent ethics advisor is available for staff as well as for board members to be able to disclose conflicts, adjudicate conflicts. As well, there is a registry of all of the conflicts that's maintained and is available publicly for all staff. I think that is a really important recommendation that was implemented, and certainly would have been very, very important would have been very helpful if we had had that previously.
And thank you.
And lastly, I'll ask, sorry, Chair, do I have time for one?
If it's very brief, you do, yes.
Very brief.
Thank you.
What is your role going to be post the transition?
I will not be transitioning to the National Research Council.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Suivant encore, c'est Madame Sinclair-Desgagnés pour...
We now have Ms. Sinclair-Desgagnés for 2.5 minutes, please. Okay, I will continue with my previous questions. The Department of Innovation, and we see this in the AG's report, that there were several warnings as to the incompatibility of the seed funding and the ecosystem. You were the director who was choosing the projects to be funded. So how can you explain that you simply decided to ignore the concerns of the department who is funding you, in fact?
So I always believed that STTC was operating within the confines of our mandate and the agreement with, we did have regular discussions and reporting of our work with department officials. Decisions related to project funding were made by the former board of directors. And so I always believed, I also acknowledge that the Auditor General has come to a different conclusion and accept all of the recommendations.
D'accord, merci beaucoup.
Okay, thank you very much. So are you telling me that you weren't aware of the concerns that the Minister of Innovation had and that this person had sent concerning the fund that you directed? You were never informed of the minister's concerns?
May I just get you to clarify your question, the minister's concerns?
Je ne parle pas directement du ministère, mais du ministère.
I'm talking about not the minister, but the department concerns. So the Auditor General, and I'm sure you've read the report. I don't need to reread in my limited time the paragraph in question, but it states clearly and categorically that the Minister of Innovation had, or the department rather, had raised concerns about non-compliance with the fund that you were directing. So the same question I'm asking for the second time, are you telling me that you were not aware of the department's concerns?
What I had regular discussions and with officials within the Department of Innovation and Science. Any concerns that they had, I would have addressed and felt that they were addressed in my discussions with them. These projects were publicly reported on. They were
en même temps,
and believed to be within our mandate. And so...
alors, vous ne connaissez pas le mandat de TDDC.
Well, then you're not aware of the mandate of STTC, because you know that a project, that the submissions have to be public, up on the internet. You have to see how that you can apply for the seeding fund or the ecosystem fund. You should have known as well that there were conflicts of interest. Now, you referred to the board, but a conflict of interest, in your eyes, you didn't report the correct information to the project review committee. And they were stakeholders. There were people who were receiving funding. You didn't give that information about concerning the conflict of interest to the board. And on top of that, the contribution agreement was not complied with. So, Ms. Kolbeck, it seems that there are things that really don't work. And you're still in your job, which is astonishing.
Est-ce que je peux avoir une explication?
Could I have an explanation, please?
There wasn't, it was more of a statement. Madame Kolbeck, as-tu des commentaires?
J'ai demandé de m'expliquer.
Do you have a comment, Ms. Kolbeck?
Comment.
I'm sure Madame Secretary will pick it up again on her next turn. Mr. Cannings, you have the floor for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you. Ms. Kolbeck, as you stated in your opening remarks and has been brought up several times during these questions, there's been some fairly serious complaints, I would say, about your, let's say, management style in dealing with employees. And you said that this was thoroughly investigated, and that report is in the public record. Can you just remind me, for one thing, and the rest of us here, what the findings of that report were?
You're talking about the McCarthy-Tetro report?
Yes.
Yeah. You want me to just read to you the final conclusions from the report? Would that be helpful? Is that what you're looking for?
Sure.
So current or former executives did not engage in the type of repetitive, vexatious, or major incident content that would constitute harassment, bullying, or workplace violence under applicable standards. The assertion that there was a toxic workplace was a minority view among participants and appears to be largely attributable to animosity towards leadership style and disagreement with management decisions, organizational changes, and conflict of interest issues. Decisions about restructuring or terminations were not made using
discriminatory criteria, nor were they arbitrary and lacking reasonable business justification. Severance packages were within market expectations, and the NDA terms in use were in keeping with customary employment practices. There's a couple more, I can keep going.
That's okay. But you mentioned one of the issues that sparked some of these bits of animosity seems to be conflict of interest issues. And was that a recurring issue in your office? That
I think as I said, the majority of the allegations that have been made to me personally, I first became aware of when I started to receive these anonymous emails. Just give me a minute. I find this difficult to speak about, that were composed in my name and included a number of them. I certainly would have worked with, if as I do as a leader, work to resolve these matters had they been raised, and certainly acknowledge there was opportunities to improve the conflict of interest practices at SDTC. I've certainly learned a lot, and I always did my best to conduct myself with high ethical standards.
Okay, thank you. That's all.
You left some time on the table. Do you want to continue your line of questioning? No, okay, very good. Thank you. Then up next is Mr. McCauley for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Witness, thanks for joining us. It's nice to see someone from Alberta, even if you are from Calgary. I want to ask, were you aware of these conflicts that were going on? Like, it was systemic. It wasn't like one or two that governance missed. Like, this was widespread systemic fraud being committed. You were a vice president, so high level. Were you aware of any of these?
So how I would be made aware is if there was a conflict declared, then I would be
And
aware.
ask that, were you aware of these conflicts?
So I was aware that there were conflicts that some board members had because they were
And what did you do with that?
So in my role as a vice president ecosystems, I always did my best to manage these conflicts of interest and to ensure that the stewardships of public funds was done in the best way possible.
Were you aware that in the contribution agreement, it was required that the foundation report conflicts or perceived conflicts to the ministry or to the minister?
Yes, I was aware of that, and it was my understanding that there was a departmental liaison who had access to the board materials, including the minutes.
Right.
And
So
the conflicts would have been
let me just ask again. So you were aware that they were required to be reported to the minister. Did you ever follow up on any of those to ensure that these conflicts were addressed?
I appreciate the question from the honourable member. It was not my responsibility to report those
I'm sorry.
conflicts.
You were a vice president, probably public service, well-compensated vice president, and you didn't believe it was your job to report these. We had a whistleblower, and I'm sure you've read the testimony because you reported on it. He was not a high-level senior executive like yourself, but he had the bravery to come forward and try and stop this fraud. But yourself as a vice president, you didn't see it as your responsibility to follow up on this? Help me out here. Like,
it was my understanding these conflicts were reported into the department by us providing them with copies of the minutes of the board meetings, the materials from the board meetings.
Fraud went on for years. You just turned a blind eye. So you were aware. You said, okay, well, we reported it through minutes, but it continued for years. 400 million stolen from taxpayers. And yet, as a vice president, you did your job by sending along an email or sending along minutes and then walking away. Like, I'm just flabbergasted how this could happen. Well, I guess I don't have an answer.
I'm sorry,
You
I
said
didn't,
that
I didn't
you-
hear a question. Was
Okay,
there a
I'm
question?
flabbergasted. How did you allow that to happen? Like, in what world does a vice president, a well-paid, well-compensated, well-pensioned vice president, not take any responsibility when taxpayers' money is being defrauded? I could see one off. If it happened once, okay, I saw the minutes went up the line, but this went on for years. Millions stolen for years. And you were aware, and you were vice president, but it was like a shrug. Sir, I don't think I'm going to get a response. I'm going to turn my final minute over to Ms. Sinclair Deguenet.
Très bien, vous avez 1 minute 4 secondes, s'il vous plaît.
Je vais vous donner.
I'll give you another opportunity to answer the question. And I'll continue in the same vein as what Mr. McCauley has been asking. Not only did you not report either to the board or to the department these conflicts of interest, you were part of it because you yourself was hiring Mr. Wormold to do the assessments on applications that he himself had written. So do you not understand what a conflict of interest is? I'm asking you a clear question. Do you understand what a conflict of interest is?
Oui ou non?
Yes or no?
I certainly have strengthened my understanding of conflict of interest.
Quand vous avez
to
été engagé
ensure
en
that I
2016, est-ce que quand vous avez été engagé en 2016,
When you were hired in 2016, did you follow conflict of interest training? Did you follow the training? Did you take it?
Yes, I would have familiarized myself with the conflict
donc,
of
vous n'aviez
interest
pas
policy
compris
upon joining the organization.
avant le rapport de la
And so before the Auditor General's report, you hadn't understood what conflict of interest was, even though you followed the training? It seemed normal to you that a person draft an application and then go over to SDTC to assess that same application? Does that seem normal to you? And not reporting this kind of behavior to the board so that the board approved the project without knowing that there was a huge conflict of interest within that project, does that seem normal to you?
So I'm going to have to say, like, all of these matters were thoroughly reviewed by the Auditor General. They've made a number of recommendations to strengthen the conflict of interest practices at STTC. The Foundation has accepted all of those recommendations, and I'm certainly following the policies and practices that are in place.
Thank you very much. Suivant, c'est M. Drouin pour 5 minutes.
Now we have Mr. Drouin for 5 minutes, please. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Just to ask a question, how often did you participate? Because I know that often CEOs, of course, will participate with the board, but were you as an individual often called to participate in board meetings?
Time to time, I would be invited into board meetings to either observe, or if there was a specific matter I needed to present on, I would present on that matter.
D'accord. Puis,
All right. I think that you alluded earlier to some issues that were brought before you concerning the conflict of interest policy. But once a conflict of interest had either been found by a member of the board, what was the internal directive and what was your role once you were aware of it? Did that change the way in which you operated, or was it just that, okay, well, there's a conflict of interest and we'll just continue regardless of what happened?
Yeah, so we would always strive to manage the conflicts of interest should we become aware of them. So as I would have mentioned, there was clearly gaps in the policies and procedures that SDTC had in place to manage the conflict of interest. I think the addition of an independent ethics advisor is a valued change within the Foundation's mandate and within the Foundation's organization. I think that person provides valuable expertise that was lacking before.
puis est-ce que vous,
And did you, given that there were several conflicts of interest within the organization, did you receive any extra payments from businesses or anything following any approval of funding?
No.
D'accord.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to take the rest of my time and table a motion. And the interpreter does not have a copy of this. Given that the committee has held 15 meetings on its Report 6 of SDTC with a total of 46 hours and 32 witnesses, including the Auditor General of Canada and the Ethics Commissioner. They have all published reports on this, and that there was a report from Raymond Chabot Grant Thornton. So, and notwithstanding any decisions of the committee should agree to have another meeting on the 27th of November on Report 6 SDTC from the Auditor General, but that the priority be given to the motion adopted by the committee on November 4th, and on the 27th of November, the committee give instructions to the analysts on the drafting of the report, and that no further meetings be held on this subject. And Mr. Chairman, you will have the motion. I'm sending it now.
Just Atanji.
Just a moment, please. There's a question for Mr. Drouin. Our clerk has received the motion just now, yes? In both official languages? Okay, I've heard.
Me, Mr. Drouin, are you proposing this motion? Sorry.
He's moving.
You're moving it. Pardon me.
Yes.
Thank you. Sorry. All right. Just give us, I'm going to just have the clerk, hold on. I have a list here. Yes, Ms. Yip, you're on the top. Mr. Nader, Mr. Cooper. Well, Mr. Perkins, all right, but I'm going to have the clerk send it around.
And me as well,
Yeah,
Chair.
very, very good. I'm going to just suspend for a minute or two. Ms. Colebrook, you are, if you could just hang tight. If you want to just stretch your legs, get up, we're going to be a couple minutes here. I usually take at the temperature of the room to see how long this is going to last, but for now, if you want to just get up for a couple minutes, that's no problem.
Thank you,
But
Mr.
don't
Chair.
disappear too far, because I might come back to you in about 5 minutes, okay?
Oh, I'll be here.
This meeting is suspended for, well, until I come back. you have all received Mr. Drouin's motion dans les deux langues officielles.
In both official languages.
Mr. Drouin, before I turn the floor back to you, would it be helpful for me to tell you and the floor what I have lined up for this Thursday already?
Wednesday.
Pardon me, for Wednesday already, and how it kind of aligns with your motion, or would you like to take the floor? You'll have the floor either way, but...
Yeah, well, sure, if
Sure.
you want to inform them.
So, just to inform, to bring the members up to speed, well, first, Mr. Drouin's motion is certainly in order. Of the witnesses you reference in your motion, we've heard from one already. I have scheduled for Wednesday both Mr. Andrew Noseworthy as well as Mr. Douglas McConaughey. And the fourth witness, Leah Lawrence, is unavailable at all. We're not able to secure contact information for her.
Oh, no, we have
Oh,
contacted
pardon
her,
me.
but
Oh, that's right. Pardon me. Pardon me. Thank you, Claire. We have contacted her. She is studying in the United States and has declined our invitation to appear. I was going to bring this up at the subcommittee meeting, which we're going to have next week, but you now have it before you. So, with that, Mr. Drouin, you have the floor.
Chair, thanks so much. And the goal for this this motion quickly, it's just that next week we've got, as you've highlighted, we've got other Auditor General's reports that are coming down the pipe. I think this committee has done a tremendous job, but we also need time for this committee to make recommendations back to the House. And we're already, I know that you won't get to table that if we continue on. You won't get to table that before springtime, understanding that there's other Auditor General's reports that are will be important for us to look at. So that's where I will stop my the rationale for the motion.
Thank you. I have a list of members. I'm just going to ring it off because I think it's going to probably occupy a good chunk of time. Ms. Yip, Mr. Nader, Mr. Cooper, Mr. Perkins, Ms. Khalid, puis après ça, Madame Desgagnés. Ms. Yip, you have the floor.
That the committee now move in camera.
Okay.
What a cover-up, Gene.
Order, order. I will call the vote to move our committee in camera.
just double checking
The clerk is just preparing the roll call.
All right. Mr. Collins.
Yes.
Monsieur Drouin.
En faveur.
Mr. Erskine-Smith. Mr. Erskine-Smith.
You're on mute, Mr. Erskine-Smith, or you can give us a thumbs up.
Yes. My headset is giving me troubles. Can I let me
Thumbs up
change
or
my headset here?
thumbs
You can thumbs up to vote or thumbs vote down.
Okay.
Thumbs up.
Ms. Khalid.
Yes.
Ms. Yip. Mr. McCauley.
No.
Mr. Nader.
No.
Mr. Cooper.
No.
Madame St. Cloud Desgagnés.
Non.
Mr. Cannings.
Did you get that?
6 yeas, 4 nays.
Order. The vote is to move this meeting into camera. Ms. Kolbuk, you are excused. Thank you very much for your time. I understand there were some questions that you will return to us in writing, and you can work with the clerk on that. You're excused. Thank you very much. I will now
Suspend. And we need to switch.
Yes, suspend this meeting, and we'll come back for the members in question into an in-camera meeting. This meeting is suspended.
Un instant avant. Pourquoi vous.
Why are you suspending? Knowing that, yes, we're moving in camera, but we have to finish before 1 o'clock, before the suspension?